Thanks for staying with us here on Breakfast Central. Nigeria's President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, says his administration has disbursed 330 billion naira to 8 million households under the social investment program during his October 1st presentation. Now, a bold claim, one that promises relief actually to millions. But there are so many questions. How transparent is the process? But let's take a look.
Under the social investment program, to support poor households and vulnerable Nigerians, 330 billion has been disbursed to 8 million households, many of whom have received either 1 or 2 out of 3 tranches of the 25,000 naira each.
The numbers are quite staggering, 25,000 naira per household across 3 tranches. But with the past scandals haunting the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, including the suspension of former Minister Betta Edu over a 585 million naira transfer to a private account, Sadiya Umar-Farouq was ordered by the federal government to account for 729 billion naira disbursed under her tenure. Nigerians are asking, where is the accountability? Join us this morning.
It's of course the Program Director of CLEEN Foundation. We have Salaudeen Hashim. Thank you very much for joining us.
For having me.
So I think straight to the point, the big question is, where is this 330 billion naira? We're seeing reports that 8 million households have benefited from this. This was first mentioned by Minister Bola Edu some weeks back and then reconfirmed by the president in his Independence Day speech, and has of course dragged a lot of criticism. So how do we verify that 330 billion naira actually reached 8 million households?
All right, this is actually another familiar terrain. It is deja vu. We have had this pathway in the past that never led into any meaningful development. There is no government anywhere in the world that uses handout as a means for poverty alleviation or for purposes of strategic development. Over the years, government in this country have been very deliberate to set up programs that provide some level of distortion and cannot be connected to the strategic economic policies. And the idea behind it is not to target citizens, but basically to be able to advance individual and greed within the system. And of course, we know too well how typical corruption had played out in our country. But what are the 2 most important elements that we need to take home from here? One, over the years, some years ago, I had actually made a request for a register of those who have benefited from this in the past. And the question I got back in return was that poor people don't want to be associated with poverty and that those registers cannot be made public, and that it is actually not in the interest of those people who are taking to be seen that their names are being published in the public space. And I think this is not very correct. And I think there should be a register, one that suggests very clearly how very important and how transparent this process had gone. 2 is whether or not those who are actually taking this money are not those associated with political parties and world structures across these local areas, and not basically the indicators of those who are truly poor. And I think that is also something to get very worried about. And maybe most fundamentally, there's a report from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and that report suggested that only 36% of those individuals who have been targeted have been reached, who have received only 1 tranche so far, a minimum of 1 tranche. And I think, again, the president needs to do a review of whether or not this is actually the best way to go as a sustainability effort towards making citizens see reasons with how to get out of poverty. What this does, the consequences of all of this, is that it creates a dependency citizenship where people just depend on handout for purposes of development. And I think this is actually negative and it must be thoroughly discouraged.
Mr. Hashim. Looking at what we've witnessed so far, and you also alluded to the fact that it gives a deja vu feeling. So we've done this before. It's not the first time we're experiencing this. What is the best way and a sustainable way to have social intervention programs that actually teach people how to fish rather than give them handouts? What's the global best practice with regards to this sort of disbursements or interventions?
Program like this with a wider economic policy. So if we intend to take a number of people out of poverty, like for instance, in China, in about a decade, they took over 40 million people out of poverty. And the idea was they linked it into agriculture, and that in itself was driven by some level of strategic government intervention. So you must have that linkage. Otherwise, you just create a silo of policies and development that does not speak to each other. And there must be some level of interaction between the formality of what you are doing and the informal intervention that you are carrying out. Because basically, where you see in developed climes that things like this happen are usually in crisis situation, crisis both economically, whether it is in pandemic, whether it is personal job crisis. In fact, in the UK, people don't want to be seen around social welfare offices to go get some level of intervention because they find it that it actually affects their own social dignity. But what matters most is that there should be some level of structured approach. One is the fact that we have a social protection policy. The social protection policy provides a number of indicators and pathway for this to happen. And the social protection policy also, even though it is not sufficient enough in terms of provision, should have a social register. That social register should be the strategic pillar that allows the process of targeting and documentation to happen. Then once they are documented, then it goes through a particular process. But you cannot say that interventions without adequate register and number. Now you have 8 million. If you have to interrogate that number, you realize that that number in itself does not exist. And even if you do disaggregation further, you realize that there are party individuals and structures and loyalists at different level who have also been benefited. I was in an office once, and a senior officer who was a director got an alert for fertilizer input. This was some years ago. She said, well, she didn't even apply, but somebody had put her name, and she didn't need it. So the fact is, hopefully, those who actually have been targeted are those who actually needed it. But overall, is that this kind of thing doesn't work. One is that we need to invest in skills for these people that will help them to be able to depend and find alternatives to their sustainable livelihood. Livelihood program and livelihood intervention goes beyond just offering handouts. Handouts will not get anywhere. If you give 25,000 naira for a family of 4, it won't take a week for them to be able to deal and conclude on that. And of course, they look for the next one. And that tells very clearly the kind of citizenship we are building that depend on handouts, and then of course become lazy, less productive, and over time they become very recalcitrant, and they just believe that it is actually a weapon. But again, the question is, are there politicization tool? Are there politicization weapon? What are the intention behind it? Because sometimes in issues like this, we also need to interrogate motive. So is the motive to actually reduce poverty, or is the motive actually to build loyalists among citizenship for purposes of re-election? I mean, I'll leave that for the states to determine.
Very good question you asked there. If it's to build loyalty, or it's actually to curb the hunger that is in the land. But let me take you back to your first comment. You did make a few statements which are very, very thought-provoking. You said you had asked for the register of the names, possibly the numbers of these ones who, in quotes, have been termed the poor and the beneficiaries of this, tranches that have been sent to them, and you weren't giving. So my question is, are Nigerians just stuck in complete docile state where they are not bothered about who is receiving this money? And what do you think needs to be done at this point? Because the NSIP will continue to dole out this money or cash to certain individuals whom we cannot identify. So what should we be asking for now that the president and one citizen has come out to say they've given them? What should Nigerians ask for, since you asked and you didn't get it?
Nigeria should first ask for the register and, of course, some level of backup details to suggest. First of all, the register. Just first give Nigerians the register, and the register will contain some basic biodata, and that will be able to validate that, okay, this person is in this location, they are male and female, they have a phone number, or even if they don't have a phone number, they live in specific address, and this is their account number. And of course, you know that we are in the era where BVN also offers some level of financial intelligence. But overall, I think the worry here is that governance and government in the last few years of our return to democracy have been very innovative in terms of how they actually move monies, whether for personal or for purposes of advancing their own political career. And that in itself has actually taken plenty of dimension. So what we are saying now is actually at the federal level. If you go to the state level, it is even worse with different provisions in the budget lines where citizens also are not aware or knowledgeable in terms of the kind and the right questions to ask. And of course, in the name of appropriation, the question is, once it is appropriated and it is actually passed by the Act of Parliament, it becomes a law. It means that it is a legitimate spending. So which means that you cannot interrogate, or you cannot fault, or you can, even if it is misappropriated, you cannot say no, because it has actually become a product of the law. The budget is the second most important document in the country after the Constitution. So in the name of appropriation, once that money has actually been passed as a resolution by the National Assembly, and then of course legitimately or illegitimately becomes the money that could be spent. But the question is, we can ask whether or not the register does exist, and if it does, what are the channels where you can actually share with citizens or those who are interested in following the money? Because we must follow the money, or otherwise this becomes like a traditional jamboree that we are familiar with on a periodic basis. Because again, it has become the very...
Hello, Mr. Hashim.
Seems to have a network connectivity. There's a lot being got to talk about here.
But I mean, saying that you're not.
How come there's no register?
Yes, saying
I think that's the biggest
to
question.
release the register on the excuse of, you know, you're
They don't
serving
want
them
to.
that.
No.
That's
You need to go on Twitter.
That's
and
the
just
biggest.
go on Twitter and see people openly their account details. If you even ask for their house addresses,
For urgent 2K.
For urgent 2K, they will. So I don't believe this. Someone that is struggling to eat, you think having his name published is the least?
Then that would be a prideful beggar. If you say, "Oh yes, I don't want to release my details."
So I don't.
The biggest question
is accountability.
I think for me, the biggest question here, Mr. President should address, is the fact that we expect that in the next 48 hours, Nigerians should demand for the register of those who have benefited from the 330 billion naira. And I think it is in good light and democratic for the president to say, okay, that's fine. Even if we are not able to provide you their data based on data protection laws. Okay, let's bring the data protection laws here into play. But we're able to provide you with these people, especially if you want freedom of information to prove that we are indeed doing what we said we will do. But if someone who has the wherewithal and the ability to request for such database, just like our guests, who has followed through in instances and cases like this,
even as journalists,
and you're told, oh, sorry, you can't get it. Because I won't lie to you, if you're watching and you're a beneficiary of the monies that are being thrown at you from the government just to use for your upkeep and to keep going, we'd like to interview you. I've not seen, even from the newspapers, I've not seen one person,
if you're watching
3, 4, 5 in the papers.
If you're watching this, then you shouldn't have been a beneficiary because you can even afford a television.
I think that it's important now more than ever for the government to present a register. There needs to be, first of all, a register that is made public to citizens. Secondly, an understanding of how the citizens whose names made it to the register were selected. And this is because we've had past scandals, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. We've had the Betta Edu, the Sadiya Umar, and to date, there hasn't been any final decision or action that has been taken to establish some form of discipline. There hasn't been closure in those cases. So until we get to that point, and even after, I think that it's imperative that we have some form of clarity. So until there is clarity with those two cases, and there is a social register that is made available to the public, this breach of trust, it will continue to widen. The gap will keep getting wider.